everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Shifty's 49ers Talk. In today's video, we are going to discuss the absolute disaster abomination that was the 49ers' first preseason game of the year against the Las Vegas Raiders. But before we get into the video, I just want to give a massive shout out to everyone who attended the stream for the game. It was a lot of fun interacting with all of you guys again, and anyone new who stopped by. I just had an absolute blast, despite the game being anything but fun to watch. But overall, huge shout out to all of you guys, all the new members, and especially to John Reed, who gave a bunch of memberships. Really appreciate you there. But with that being said, let's get into the video. Alrighty guys, let's get into the breakdown of this game. And what I want to do is I want to start off with some of the good. Despite the scoreline and just despite how the game played out, there were some good things and positive things to take away from this game. The first thing that I want to say is Ronnie Bell, rookie wide receiver, 7th round pick out of Michigan. Just a guy who looks like he belongs in the NFL. You know, had that bad drop from the pass from Brandon Allen that led to an interception, but on that play, really nice route, got wide open and just dropped the ball. But beyond that, 3 receptions, 58 yards, had that nice little end around run earlier in the game, really got the offense going after struggling early on. That run for 15 yards, and also looked okay on return duties. Although when it comes to punt returning, you know, Ronnie Bell, there is such a thing as a fair catch. But overall, I thought promising start for the rookie Ronnie Bell. Again, looks like a guy who belongs. Now, some other positives if we look on the offensive side of the ball, I did think that Tyrion Davis-Price looked more decisive in his running, looked a little bit better than maybe what we've seen before, but overall the blocking just wasn't there, so it's a little bit hard to gauge just how well those guys played. Jordan Mason continued to do Jordan Mason things where he just is a very, very tough runner and will churn out and fight for every single yard. Although with Jordan Mason, he did have a really bad drop from a short pass from Trey Lance, so that's definitely a negative on him. But also, if you look at the tight ends, I thought Ross Dwelley shows that he's a very capable receiver at tight end. Blocking still leaves a little bit to be desired, but that crazy touchdown, just the heads-up play, the athleticism, had a couple of other decent catches. Troy Fumagalli had a couple of nice catches as well in the game, if I'm not mistaken. So that's a really positive there on the offense. Outside of that, there really wasn't a whole lot there, unfortunately. Now, if we move on to the defensive side of the ball, where there was some positive things to look at, I thought Clelin Ferrell, our free agent addition from the Raiders, was our best defensive player on the field. And let's keep in mind, both offensively and defensively, we didn't have a single starter out there. So let's all keep that in mind. But Clelin Ferrell was probably our best player, had a sack, tackle for loss, a guy who really making a case to start opposite of Nick Bosa come week 1, and I wouldn't be surprised if that is the case. Now, a couple of other defenders who I thought played really well. Ambry Thomas, good to see him be active, had a really nice pass defense. Love to see that. Really sticky coverage, also physical, which is something that we're used to seeing in 49ers defenses. Safety Taylor Hawkins in his second year, I thought he had a good game. Kind of blew it on that safety blitz where he really easily could have sacked the Raiders quarterback, but then kind of did like a jump and the Raiders quarterback got around him. But he was a guy who stood out a little bit too. And then some players who kind of looked just active, who were very involved in the game. I look at guys like Marcelino McCrary-Ball. Jalen Graham was pretty active in the game too, and I thought Demetrius Flanagan-Foles, those guys were okay, definitely involved. McCrary-Ball had a couple of really nice tackles. And then if we move on to the special teams, and again, right now, just focusing on the positive, Mitch Wishnowsky punting the football, thought he did a really great job, averaged just about 50 yards per punt. Also, I thought the punt return coverage was really, really solid. In addition to looking at the kick return coverage was much improved. Returning wise, in terms of kick returns and punt returns, Deshaun Jameson looks like a guy who can just break a big one at any moment. Unfortunately, he did that 3 times last night, but they were all called back for holding penalties. So, you know, whether you want to look at that as a positive or a negative, that's really up to a matter of perception. But I do think it's promising for a guy like Deshaun Jameson trying to earn a roster spot, especially with Ray McLeod, our primary returner, probably going to be out for the first 6 weeks of the season. But there you have it, guys, for the good, positive things that happened in the game. Next, we're going to tackle and take on all of the negative things, so bear with me for that. Let's now move on to some of the more negative aspects of the game. And unfortunately, this part of the video is going to be extensive, and that's going to be natural when you lose a game 34-7. Although it's only preseason, it's only preseason, it's only preseason. However, let's move on to some of the negatives. So, with the offense, overall, it was a complete disaster from start to finish. It's always going to be that way when you only score 7 points. And if we look at that 7 points that was scored, that touchdown pass probably could have been, more likely should have been intercepted, but luckily the bounce went our way for that one play at the very least. But let's look at the offense and analyze it a little bit more further. So overall, really couldn't move the ball. Trey Lance, performance I thought was up and down. Some passes, again, that touchdown pass probably should have been intercepted. Had another pass earlier looking for Willie Snead, I think, over the middle. That should have been intercepted. And I think some more negatives, unfortunately, with Trey Lance were that looked and seemed to hesitate a lot. There's a number of pictures here I'll put up at this point where, I think if he made the pass and was a little bit more decisive, could have got that guy, but just hesitated and then all of a sudden had to bounce out of the pocket and try and make a dump off pass or just make something happen with his legs. Unfortunately, coupled with those things were the fact that the offensive line was just bad. The left guard, Jason Poe, half the time it seemed like he wasn't blocking anybody. Right guard, Nick Sakel, he was terrible, couldn't hold any blocks. Trey Lance seemingly under pressure almost from the moment the ball was snapped. So that, of course, is going to affect quarterback play, absolutely. When I look at this and any criticism that I have of the offense, I think it's actually just the offense in general. You look at the blocking, we didn't have any of our main weapons out there. The quarterback play wasn't great. And also the play calling. The play calling, very different to what you'd normally see in a regular season from Kyle Shanahan. So, for example, of the first 9 plays of the game that I can remember, 8 of them were passes. That if this was a regular season on the road, we'd run the ball a lot more with guys like McCaffrey and Mason and maybe do Deebo Samuel back there too. So, I think we wanted to see Trey Lance get some, reps in. Unfortunately, a lot of the times they weren't great. Whether, you want to blame Trey Lance or not, it's really just, your call there. But I think, going back to Trey, kind of, zeroed in on one receiver a bit and then just hesitated. So I'd like to see him in preseason week 2 and 3 just be more decisive. If you make mistakes, you make mistakes. It's preseason. In a month's time, nobody's going to remember any of these games. But I'd like to see Trey Lance look a little bit better, and I'd like to see the offensive line play a whole lot better moving forward in the preseason. Sam Darnold, I thought he had a really nice throw to Ronnie Bell. Outside of that, he looked okay. Missed a couple of passes, made a couple of other passes. Things were a little bit difficult for Sam Darnold because he had a false start. Then he had an illegal formation, and that kind of set up the offense to fail. But I thought Sam Darnold was okay. Brandon Allen just, third quarterback, he made a couple of decent throws. Stats were okay. But you look at it, that, of course, the pass to Ronnie Bell, that interception, absolutely not on Brandon Allen. But overall, looked fine. Probably going to be a guy who gets picked up on another team's 53-man roster when it's all said and done. Now, moving on to if we look at the offensive line, if we look at the tight ends, but the offensive line struggled all game long. Running, couldn't get anything going. Look at the times where we had 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, and there was just no push. Now, I know guys like Jimmy Garoppolo really were great when he was here with the quarterback sneak, but Sam Darnold had one. The second the ball was snapped, he was pushed back 2 yards. You can't do anything with that. The blocking was dreadful on those short yardage situations. Pass blocking, it was just a nightmare to watch. Tight ends. Cameron Latou, I was really hoping that he'd kind of burst onto the scene with a big game, especially after struggling quite a bit in training camp. Had one catch, fumbled the ball inside our own 20-yard line. Not a great performance there, and really not a confidence-inspiring performance either. And not a lot of positives here with the offense. I just think from top to bottom, everyone's to blame. I'm not going to blame one player in particular, one person in particular, but it's only preseason. We've played bad before in preseason. Look back to the Houston Texans preseason game last year. That was really, really bad. And then we went on to have obviously a great regular season. But a lot of improvements needed in the offense, top to bottom. Hopefully we'll see a little bit more next week in our next game and against the Denver Broncos in preseason week 2, because this offense was tough to watch. Let's now move on to the defensive side of the ball, where there are a lot of areas of improvement are going to be needed. And if we focus now on the defensive line, probably one of the most disappointing players of the night last night, and there were a number of them, was Javon Kinlaw. Javon Kinlaw was out there, not for the entire game, of course, but he did get some snaps and really was invisible out there. Really got washed out on a number of blocks by a Raiders backup offensive line. So that's not a good sign for Javon Kinlaw. Apparently having a really, really nice training camp. And I do still hold out some hope for a guy like Javon Kinlaw. He's gone through a lot of injuries, but hopefully his performances in preseason week 2 and week 3 will be much improved. We never know what can happen with injuries throughout the course of a season. So there's going to be times where we just rotate in and out defensive linemen. So I want to see Javon Kinlaw prove me wrong in the next few weeks, but he did not look great. And look, when it comes to rush defense, because we were getting gashed by the Raiders running offense, it's not all on him. Let's be clear about that. But he's someone who I was hoping would come out and kind of maybe have a couple of impact plays, maybe look a little bit more dominant. That just wasn't the case. Outside of that, the defensive line really struggled. We pride ourselves on the 49ers defense of getting pressure with our front four. Also remind us, none of the starters except for possibly Clelin Ferrell were out there against the Raiders, but we didn't really get any pressure with our front four against, again, the Raiders' backup offensive line. So let's keep that in mind. I'd like to see maybe a little bit more from guys like Austin Bryan and Robert Beal and, Kerry Hyder. We did have a nice stop on a 4th and 1, thanks to, large part to the defensive line, but I think overall the performance was pretty bad, considering especially just being gashed so badly in the run game, which just allowed the Raiders offense to just be put in good situations. So, I'd like to see a big improvement next week against the Denver Broncos there. Now, moving on to the linebackers. I thought the linebackers, they were flying around, making a couple of plays, like Jalen Graham had a couple of moments, but also a couple of not so great moments where tight ends were wide open, getting beat pretty badly in coverage. So that's going to be a massive area of improvement I think that the Niners are going to have to focus on in the coming weeks leading up to the regular season. I thought that tight end, I think it was number 85 for the Raiders, seemingly getting wide open on every single play. So the linebackers really have to tighten it up with the coverage. Now, with the secondary, a couple of players who I was hoping would maybe look a little bit better. Isaiah Oliver, who could be projected to be our starting nickelback, gave up there's like a touchdown reception. Didn't look super sticky, we'll call it, when it comes to man coverage, which we're going to be running more of in the Steve Wilks defense compared to D'Amico Ryans. And that's pretty natural because D'Amico Ryans ran the highest rate of zone coverage in the NFL last year. But we're going to be running more man coverage with Steve Wilks. I'd like to see Isaiah Oliver look a little bit better moving forward, just to gain that confidence, not only in himself, but also, for the fan base and the coaching staff to be comfortable with him being a starter out there week 1 against the Steelers. Sammy Womack, we saw him get beat pretty badly on that play. It was Turner, the rookie receiver for the Raiders. That guy is just lightning quick, but Womack got beat pretty badly on that play. Had a couple of nice tackles though, so good to see Sammy Womack with that, and also looking good with the number 0. I'm a big fan of that. But the 49ers defense as a whole, didn't play great, but I don't think we're dreadful. Now, you look at the 34 points given up and you naturally assume that's a really bad performance by the defense, but they were put in so many just awful situations by the offense. You look at the Cameron Latou fumble, the Raiders had the ball within the 15-yard line. You look at the interception when Ronnie Bell didn't catch it, the ball flips up, that got returned to the 2-yard line. So the Niners defense, basically that's 10 to 14 points essentially just handed to the Raiders offense. Niners offense couldn't stay on the field at all, so that meant the Niners defense was out there a lot, and just not a great performance. I don't want to freak out about this, Steve Wilks as a defensive coordinator, because again, the starting defense wasn't out there, and the starting defense has multiple All-Pro players, multiple Pro Bowl players, so we have to pump the gas there. But I'd like to see, when it comes to preseason week 2, preseason week 3, maybe a couple of more splash plays and more sacks, maybe a couple of turnovers, just to build that confidence with the new defensive coordinator heading into the regular season. Next up, we're going to talk about just the special teams and then just the coaching in general. when looking at this game from a special teams perspective, there were some positives, and we touched on those earlier. The big negative, of course, no question about it, is going to be Jake Moody. He had the extra point, which is great. The kickoffs were fine, but missing the 2 field goals, and that's just a really, really tough way to start a career. The first field goal was from 40 yards. The next one was, a 56, 58 yarder. So not going to be expected to make those on a consistent basis by any means, but you would have liked to have seen him nail that 40-yarder, and just to get some confidence going. It is one of those things where I think if any position is mental, we know the quarterback position, you have to mentally have a grasp of it, but kicking is just such a psychological position where you have to be in the zone to make it happen, and hopefully this won't affect Jake Moody moving forward. By all accounts, from his personality, it won't affect him, and I'd like to see him next week against the Broncos just hit a couple of field goals, but pretty concerning to start off. The fact that he's a 3rd-round pick, you're going to have unfair expectations put on you. When you're a kicker drafted in the 3rd round, you're essentially going to be expected to be Justin Tucker, essentially. But yeah, the performance, a little bit concerning. I'm not terribly worried. I'm not saying that he's a bust like some people are saying online. I think you just, chin up and move on to the next game. It's only preseason. You have to put this game behind you. None of this really counts, but I would like to see Jake Moody be at least a little bit more consistent moving forward, because it didn't look great at all against the Raiders. Now, some other areas of concern when it came to special teams very quickly were all the penalties. The penalties. Deshaun Jameson, 3 really good returns, all of them brought back from 3 penalties. That's not a good sign. It's one of those things where special teams can really make or break a game and really can change the outcome of a game. So many of those returns that Jameson had would have put the Niners in good to great starting field position, but then 2 of the times we ended up being back within our own 10-yard line, and that's just incredibly difficult for an offense to operate under. So special teams, I'd like to see massive improvement. Brian Schneider's really got to get the guys together, and this is difficult from a special teams perspective because you're talking about a lot of different guys rotating in and out in the preseason, end of the roster guys trying to make a big play to get it on the 53-man roster, maybe trying a little bit too hard, and then causing a penalty, maybe trying to open things up, and it just doesn't work out. So, but I'd like to see us play a little bit more clean from a special teams moving forward, whether it's the kicking game, whether it's the reducing the amount of flags in our return game. And if we look at just the coaching overall, and let's just kind of take a step back about this game. This is a game where, we've seen the Niners have bad preseason games before. I'm going to point out the Texans game last year. The Texans ended up being arguably the worst team in football last year. We were one of the best teams in football last year. They dominated us in the preseason last year. So we have to pump the gas on freaking out or anything. But overall, I think some of the big things were concerning: offensive line, quarterback play was inconsistent. The play calling was, I think the play calling was designed offensively to just see what our players, to give guys like Trey Lance more passing reps. It wasn't like a typical game plan. You're not really going to game plan for a preseason game. But I think the discipline, a lot of flags against the 49ers, false starts, holdings, illegal formations, just not good enough. We're used to seeing the Raiders have all the flags, so it's weird to play against the Raiders, and we're the ones with all the flags. But overall, look, it's not a good performance, and I'm not happy with their performance. There were a couple of good things to take away from the game, a lot of not so good things. There's a lot to work on, a lot to improve on, but let's just put it this way. I would much rather have a really bad performance week 1 of the preseason as opposed to week 3 of the preseason or in the regular season. So, if we get a really awful performance like that out of the way, the guys can kind of reset, recalibrate, and go into the rest of the preseason and into the regular season with some more momentum. That would be awesome to see. But just really tough to watch. And I just, again, want to say thank you so much for all the people who attended the stream. because otherwise that would have been just an absolute nightmare if I watched that by myself. But I appreciate all of you guys for being there at the stream. Let me know your thoughts on the Raider game. I'm sure people are going to have a lot of interesting thoughts, but your areas of concern, maybe some of your silver linings to take away from the game, maybe some things that I didn't touch on in this video. I want to hear from you guys, your thoughts and opinions on the game. But again, thank you so much for checking out the video. If you enjoyed the content, do consider dropping a like on the video, sharing the video, subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. I'm gonna head on out of here, but you know, guys, before I go, I'm gonna say two things. The butt counts, and I'll catch you guys on the flip side.